Have you ever felt the crushing loneliness of being truly by yourself? That eerie silence that most people run from, filling it with noise, distractions, and endless scrolling? Today, I invite you into a journey that could change every fiber of how you perceive solitude. Because what 99.9% of people don't realize is that solitude isn't a weakness. It's a superpower. And a man named Arthur Schopenhauer discovered this truth long before the rest of us even had a clue. But before we dive deeper, let me ask you a question that might haunt you for days. When was the last time you sat with yourself, completely alone, with no distractions, and actually listened?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Schopenhauer believed that solitude wasn't just a preference for the wise, it was a necessity. Imagine a world where you don't need the validation of others to feel alive, where your worth isn't measured by your followers, your likes, or your ability to entertain. In solitude, all the illusions that society piles onto us begin to melt away. What remains is frightening to most, but liberating to a few. Are you courageous enough to face who you really are when no one is watching? I decided to put this to the test. I locked myself away for 7 days, no phone, no internet, no human contact, just me and my thoughts. The first day was unbearable. My mind screamed for stimulation, for noise, for anything. I realized then how addicted I had become to escaping myself. But by the third day, something strange began to happen. The endless chatter in my mind started to slow, like a storm finally passing. Schopenhauer said that ordinary people are like a river fed by many tributaries. They need constant input from the outside to keep their spirit alive. But the exceptional person, he said, is like a mighty spring that bubbles up from the depth of the earth, needing nothing external to sustain itself. Can you imagine becoming that spring? A source of energy, creativity, and peace that's entirely self-sufficient. Think about it. How differently would you live if you no longer needed anyone's approval, affection, or understanding to feel whole? As I sat in silence, I began to realize something profound. Most of our suffering comes not from being alone, but from resisting being alone. We are terrified of our own company. Why? Because when all distractions are stripped away, we are forced to confront the truth of our lives, our regrets, our fears, our unrealized potentials. Society teaches us to run from this confrontation, to drown it in entertainment, busyness, and superficial relationships. But Schopenhauer invites us to do the opposite, to turn toward it. It's in solitude that the mind sharpens like a blade. Without the constant noise of the world, your thoughts become clearer, deeper, more profound. You begin to see patterns in your life that were invisible before. You realize how much of your behavior was simply a reaction to the expectations of others. In solitude, you meet the only person who will ever truly accompany you from birth to death, yourself. And what kind of relationship have you built with that person? Around the third day of my isolation, I experienced what I can only describe as a mental rebirth. The cravings for distraction faded. The anxiety dissolved. What emerged was a stillness so intense it felt almost sacred. In that stillness, I realized that I had been outsourcing my happiness for years, depending on others to make me feel valuable, important, loved. But in the silence, I found a deeper source of value inside myself, a value that had nothing to do with achievement or recognition. Schopenhauer warned that people who cannot stand to be alone are slaves to the world. They are constantly tossed around by the opinions, moods, and actions of others. But those who master solitude become free in a way that most people can't even fathom. They become creators of their own reality, independent, resilient, deeply wise. Isn't that the kind of freedom we all secretly crave? But I want you to face something uncomfortable right now. If you find yourself constantly needing company, entertainment, or validation, what is it that you're running from? What truth about yourself are you afraid to confront? Remember, every time you reach for your phone without thinking, every time you fill your calendar with obligations you secretly resent, you are choosing the comfort of distraction over the challenge of growth. And growth, my friends, demands solitude. On the fourth day, something even more surprising happened. Memories I hadn't thought about in years began resurfacing. Old regrets, buried emotions, forgotten dreams. It was as if my mind, finally free from external input, started cleaning house. And yes, it was painful. There were moments when I wept without even knowing why. But there was also an incredible sense of liberation, like purging toxins from the soul. Schopenhauer understood this purification process. He wrote that solitude is essential for developing depth of character. Without it, we remain shallow, easily influenced, perpetually immature. But with it, we grow roots. We become like ancient trees that can withstand any storm because our foundation runs deep into the earth. How deep are your roots? Would you survive if the winds of fortune turned against you tomorrow? Imagine a life where you are no longer swayed by public opinion. A life where you can walk away from toxic relationships without fear. A life where you can sit alone in a room and feel complete. That life is available to you. But it demands that you do the hard, uncomfortable work that 99.9% of people refuse to do. By the fifth day, I no longer felt isolated. I felt connected, not to people, but to something bigger. Call it nature, the universe, the divine, or simply a deeper version of yourself. It was a connection that transcended words and social rituals. It was pure being. And I realized that this is what Schopenhauer meant when he said that the greatest minds have always preferred solitude. Because only in solitude can you touch the eternal, the infinite, the true. Now, I want to ask you something that could change your life if you answer it honestly. If you had to spend the next year completely alone, with no one but yourself for company, would you thrive or would you crumble? Your answer reveals everything about the strength of your spirit. And if you don't like your answer, maybe it's time to start changing it. The truth is, solitude is uncomfortable because it strips away our illusions. It shows us who we really are, not who we pretend to be. But isn't that exactly the point? How can we ever hope to live authentically if we don't first dare to face ourselves without masks, without distractions, without applause? Solitude is the forge in which true selfhood is born. When I finally ended my 7-day isolation, I emerged a different person. Stronger, quieter, more intentional. The world that once overwhelmed me with its chaos now seemed distant, almost dreamlike. And I realized that the real treasure wasn't out there in the noise. It was inside me all along, waiting in the silence, patient and eternal. Schopenhauer gave us the map, but few have the courage to follow it. He showed that solitude is not a punishment, it's a privilege. It's the laboratory of the soul, the birthplace of genius, the sanctuary where true freedom is found. And yet, almost everyone flees from it. Why do you think that is? Maybe it's because facing the infinite space inside ourselves can feel like facing death itself. The death of the ego, the death of illusions, the death of the small, fearful self that clings to others for meaning. But beyond that death lies something incredible: rebirth. A self that no longer needs to beg for scraps of validation from the world. Now the question is, are you willing to die to who you think you are in order to be reborn into who you truly are? When I returned to the world after my 7 days of isolation, I realized that something fundamental inside me had shifted. The noise that used to pull at my attention now seemed like background static. Conversations that once drained me now revealed their emptiness. I could see with painful clarity how much of human interaction is merely a dance of egos, each person desperately trying to be seen, to be heard, to be validated. And yet, having faced the terrifying beauty of my own solitude, I no longer needed to join that desperate dance. I could simply be. Schopenhauer warned that the greatest danger of society is conformity. The more we surround ourselves with others, the more we begin to unconsciously adopt their values, their fears, their limitations. It happens slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a drop of dye coloring an entire glass of water. You think you're making your own choices, but are you? Have you ever stopped to ask yourself how many of your dreams are truly yours, and how many were implanted by the expectations of others? Solitude is the only antidote to this invisible poisoning of the soul. In solitude, you begin to hear your own true voice again, faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. But the more you listen, the clearer it becomes. You start to remember what you loved before the world told you what to love. You start to rediscover passions and desires that had been buried under years of societal programming. And most importantly, you start to realize that you don't need permission to live life on your own terms. On the 6th day, while sitting in absolute silence, I experienced something that words can barely capture. It was as if all boundaries between myself and the universe dissolved. I was no longer a separate entity, striving and struggling. I was part of something vast, timeless, and beautiful. This wasn't a mystical hallucination. It was a direct, undeniable experience of unity. And in that moment, I understood why Schopenhauer said that solitude is the path to the sublime. Most people spend their lives chasing happiness through external means, relationships, achievements, possessions. But in solitude, you discover a different kind of happiness, one that isn't dependent on anything outside yourself. It's a quiet, steady joy that comes from simply being. Not being someone, not being something, just being. Can you imagine how liberating that is? To need nothing and no one to feel complete. But solitude is not just about blissful experiences. It's also about facing the darkness within. During my isolation, I confronted parts of myself that I had long ignored. Insecurities, regrets, fears. It was brutal. There were nights when I felt like I was being torn apart from the inside. But it was also necessary, because only by facing our inner demons can we begin to heal them. And healing, true healing, cannot happen in the noise of the world. It requires the sacred silence of solitude. Schopenhauer knew that solitude is a double-edged sword. It can either destroy you or transform you. The weak are broken by it. The strong are purified by it. Which side will you fall on? Will you allow solitude to crush you under the weight of your own unexamined fears, or will you use it as a crucible to forge a new, stronger self? One of the most astonishing realizations I had during my solitude was how much of my anxiety came from trying to control things outside of my control. Other people's opinions, future outcomes, random events. But in solitude, stripped of all external distractions, I saw clearly the only thing I can ever truly control is my own mind, my own choices, my own reactions. And in that realization, there was immense freedom. Imagine living your life no longer as a reactive creature, constantly pushed and pulled by external forces, but as a sovereign being, grounded in an unshakable inner peace. Think about it. How much energy would you reclaim if you stopped worrying about what others think? How much creativity would you unlock if you stopped chasing approval? How much more alive would you feel if you lived for yourself, not for the expectations of others? Schopenhauer didn't just theorize about these things. He lived them. He chose a life of voluntary solitude, even though it meant being misunderstood, criticized, and forgotten by the masses. He understood that true greatness is often invisible to the crowd, that the brightest flames often burn in silence. Are you willing to be invisible to the world in order to be true to yourself? During my week of isolation, I realized that most people fear solitude because it threatens their constructed identity. Without others to reflect back who we think we are, our sense of self begins to dissolve. And that dissolution feels like death. But what dies is not the real self. It's the mask, the persona, the fragile ego. And once it dies, something extraordinary happens. The true self begins to emerge. This emergence is not dramatic. It's subtle, almost imperceptible at first. A deeper calmness, a clearer sense of purpose, a more profound compassion for others because you no longer need them to validate your existence. You can love without clinging, give without expecting, live without pretending. Isn't that the kind of freedom your soul has been yearning for all along? As the end of my isolation approached, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Gratitude for the profound transformation I had undergone, sadness at leaving behind the pure, silent world I had discovered, and determination to carry the lessons of solitude back into the noise of daily life. Because the true challenge is not to find peace in isolation, but to maintain that peace amidst chaos. Schopenhauer believed that the highest form of human existence is one that transcends the need for constant interaction. Not because we despise others, but because we have found something infinitely more fulfilling within ourselves. A wellspring of wisdom, creativity, and love that never runs dry. And once you've tasted that inner source, you can engage with the world not from a place of neediness, but from a place of abundance. I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself, if everything external were stripped away, your relationships, your career, your possessions, would you still find your life meaningful? If the answer is no, then maybe it's time to begin the journey inward, to cultivate an inner life so rich, so vibrant, that no external loss could ever truly impoverish you. Solitude taught me that true happiness is not about adding more to our lives. It's about removing the false, the unnecessary, the distracting. It's about peeling away the layers of conditioning until only the essential remains. What is essential for you? What if everything else fell away? Would you still hold on to? In the silence of solitude, I found that the most essential things are not things at all. They are qualities of being, awareness, presence, love, wisdom. These cannot be bought. They cannot be given by others. They can only be discovered within. And once discovered, they become your most precious treasures, immune to the vicissitudes of fate. Schopenhauer's philosophy is not easy. It demands that we let go of illusions that most people spend their entire lives clinging to. It demands courage, patience, and immense honesty. But the reward is beyond anything the world can offer. A freedom so profound that even death itself loses its sting. Because when you have found your true self, when you have touched the eternal within, you know that nothing essential can ever be lost. So I challenge you, dare to be alone. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Dare to face the silence without flinching. Dare to meet yourself without masks. Dare to discover, as Schopenhauer did, that solitude is not a curse, but the gateway to your greatest power. And when you do, you will understand something that 99.9% of people never will, that the true source of strength, of creativity, of joy, is not out there in the world. It's in here, in the silent depths of your own being, waiting, always waiting, for you to finally come home. The transformation that solitude brings is not immediate. It is slow, subtle, and often painful. But every moment you spend in true aloneness is a step toward reclaiming your authentic self. And as Schopenhauer understood, this authenticity is the rarest treasure in a world obsessed with appearances. Most people live their entire lives as copies of copies, never once glimpsing the original masterpiece within. Are you willing to risk everything you think you are, to discover everything you truly are? As I reintegrated into the noise of society, I noticed how much fear controls people's lives. Fear of missing out, fear of rejection, fear of being alone. They don't realize that the very thing they avoid, solitude, holds the key to their liberation. They cling to shallow friendships, meaningless conversations, and endless distractions, not realizing that all they are doing is prolonging their own suffering. What would happen if, instead of running from loneliness, you embraced it fully? The fear of solitude is really the fear of facing the void inside ourselves. But what Schopenhauer teaches us is that beyond that void lies a wellspring of infinite richness. The void is not empty, it is pregnant with possibility. It is the blank canvas upon which the masterpiece of your life can be painted. But first, you must be willing to sit in the emptiness without flinching, to stare into the abyss and allow it to stare back into you. Are you ready for that confrontation? During my solitary retreat, I realized that every fear I had was a thought, nothing more. And thoughts only have power when we believe them. In the silence, stripped of external validation, I could see my fears for what they were: paper tigers, illusions, stories I had been telling myself for years. And once I stopped believing those stories, they lost their hold over me. What stories are you telling yourself that keep you trapped? The power of solitude is that it forces you to become your own anchor. In a stormy world where everything is transient and uncertain, most people seek stability outside themselves. In relationships, careers, possessions. But all these external anchors are temporary. They can be lost in an instant. True stability comes only from within. From knowing who you are at your core, independent of circumstances. Have you found that inner anchor yet? Schopenhauer understood that solitude is not about isolating yourself out of bitterness or fear. It's about choosing aloneness as a path to deeper connection, not with the superficial chatter of the world, but with the fundamental truths of existence. In solitude, you reconnect with nature, with the cosmos, with the eternal rhythms of life that pulse beneath the noise of human society. You realize you are not alone at all. You are part of something vast and beautiful beyond comprehension. On the 7th day of my solitude, I experienced a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the silence. Gratitude for the discomfort. Gratitude even for the loneliness. Because each of these was a teacher, stripping away the false to reveal the true. And the truth was simple, yet infinitely profound. I am enough. Not because of what I achieve, not because of how others see me, but because existence itself is enough. Imagine living your life from that place. Imagine waking up each day not chasing after worthiness, but simply expressing the worth that is already yours. Imagine loving others not out of need, but from an overflow of fullness. Imagine working not for recognition, but for the pure joy of creation. This is what solitude can unlock within you. This is the superpower that 99.9% of people never realize they have. But solitude is not a one-time event. It is a practice, a way of being. In a world that constantly pulls us outward, we must intentionally turn inward again and again. We must carve out spaces of silence amidst the noise. We must prioritize being over doing, presence over performance. How often do you make time just to be with yourself, without an agenda, without distractions? The more you practice solitude, the more you realize that true fulfillment has nothing to do with quantity of possessions, achievements, or even relationships, and everything to do with quality. The quality of your awareness, the quality of your presence, the quality of your connection to yourself and the universe. And this quality can only be cultivated in the sacred space of solitude. Schopenhauer's wisdom is a radical challenge to the modern world. He dares us to believe that the highest life is not the most active, but the most reflective. Not the most crowded, but the most authentic. Not the most celebrated, but the most true. In a world that worships busyness, he invites us to slow down. In a world that prizes popularity, he invites us to cherish aloneness. In a world that fears silence, he invites us to dive into it headfirst. But this path is not for everyone. It requires immense courage. Courage to be misunderstood. Courage to be judged. Courage to walk alone when the herd rushes in the opposite direction. Do you have that courage? Or will you continue to trade the infinite riches of your soul for the fleeting approval of the crowd? As you grow in solitude, you also grow in compassion. Because once you have faced your own darkness, you can no longer judge others for theirs. Once you have touched the sacred silence within yourself, you recognize it in others, even if they have forgotten it. You move through the world with a quiet strength, a deep kindness, a radiant authenticity. You become a light in a world of shadows. And here's the final paradox. The more comfortable you become with solitude, the deeper your relationships with others can become. Because you are no longer seeking to complete yourself through them. You are already whole. And from that wholeness, you can truly love, not from need, but from abundance. Not from fear, but from freedom. Isn't that the kind of love we all long for, deep down? Schopenhauer's life was not easy. He was often lonely, often misunderstood. But he chose solitude over conformity. He chose truth over comfort. And in doing so, he tapped into a wisdom that continues to illuminate the path for those brave enough to follow it. Will you be one of them? As this journey comes to an end, I want to leave you with a final, haunting question. If you were to spend the remainder of your life completely alone, would you wither? Or would you bloom? Your answer is not fixed. It can change. It can evolve. It can grow. And the path to that growth is solitude. So take the risk. Embrace the silence. Face the void. And discover, as Schopenhauer did, that the thing you fear the most may become your greatest ally, your most potent superpower, your truest freedom. Because in the end, solitude is not the absence of love. It is the source of it. It is not a punishment. It is a portal. It is not loneliness. It is liberation. And once you have tasted that liberation, you will never again settle for the shallow comforts of the crowd. You will walk your own path. You will live your own truth. You will become, finally and irrevocably, yourself. And that, my friends, is the most powerful way to live.